Have you ever witnessed a moment so savage, so precise, that it didn't just silence a room but left a permanent mark on everyone in it? A moment where reality bent ever so slightly, egos crumbled, and reputations began to spiral, all because of a few words? Let's take you there. Imagine the setting: velvet ropes, chandeliers dripping with crystals, waiters gliding silently with trays of champagne. The Starlight Gala is not just any event, it's where old money meets new empires, where billionaires casually mingle with A-list celebrities, and the media snaps every micro-expression like it's a stock ticker reacting to the market. Everyone there is somebody, or desperately trying to be. That night was already set to sparkle. People arrived in gowns that cost more than most people's homes. Security was tight, conversations were quiet but calculated, small talk with high stakes. There was buzz about a potential merger between two major tech companies. Rumors of a royal appearance swirled. But above all, there was talk about Johnny Depp making a rare appearance. Depp, whose name has floated through decades of cinematic glory, public scrutiny, artistic reinvention, and legal turmoil, had been keeping a relatively low profile in recent years. After a long stretch of dominating the entertainment world, from his brooding breakout roles in the 90s to the eccentric mega-success of Jack Sparrow, Johnny had seen his star dimmed not by talent but by tabloid-fueled drama and courtroom, battles that threatened to redefine his legacy. Still, through all of it, his mystique remained intact. He wasn't just a Hollywood actor anymore. He was a symbol of rebellion, of resilience, of a man refusing to be shaped by other people's narratives. The decision to attend the Starlight Gala surprised many. After all, it wasn't a film premiere, an art exhibition, or even a music benefit, events where Depp's eclectic interests would be expected. It was a sleek, tech-dominated charity evening hosted by some of Silicon Valley's most powerful families, known more for cryptocurrency portfolios than cinema, but Johnny's attendance wasn't without purpose. He had recently lent his name to a philanthropic initiative supporting mental health resources for underprivileged artists, a cause backed by one of the night's featured fundraisers. It was quiet work, not the kind of headline-grabbing activism celebrities often parade around, but that's how Johnny operated these days. If he was going to appear in public, it had to mean something. The gala, set in an opulent hall adorned with cascading crystal chandeliers and ambient lighting that bathed the crowd in gold, was already buzzing by the time Depp arrived. Rumors of his attendance had swirled since the guest list leaked, but few believed he would actually show. He had, after all, become something of a ghost figure, surfacing sporadically in European jazz clubs, behind the scenes of indie projects, or in low-lit corners of cafes, far from the madness of Hollywood. But when he stepped onto the gala's champagne carpet, flanked by minimal security and dressed in an understated yet impeccably tailored black suit with vintage accessories that echoed his timeless style, the atmosphere shifted instantly. A hush followed his entrance, not out of fear or controversy, but awe. Even among billionaires and global influencers, Johnny Depp's presence commanded something different, an energy that couldn't be quantified by net worth or app valuation. Conversations stuttered as people stole glances, some subtle, others blatant. Phones were discreetly raised, not to snap photos, but to send the inevitable message: "He's here." To outsiders, the tech elite often project an air of superiority detached from Hollywood glamour. They're about algorithms, not aesthetics, IPOs, not red carpets. But Depp transcended both spheres. His aura wasn't one of celebrity, it was of legacy. And that made him even more fascinating to those gathered that night. He wasn't trending, he was timeless. And in an age where virality is mistaken for significance, that made all the difference. Among the murmurs that followed him through the marble-floored hall were layered questions. Some wondered what angle he was working. Was this a comeback maneuver? A networking experiment? An effort to rehabilitate his image further? Others speculated that he was scouting potential investors for an upcoming passion project, but those closer to him knew better. Johnny doesn't make moves that obvious. His appearances are statements, and this was no exception. He moved through the room slowly, not out of discomfort, but deliberate grace. He greeted those he knew with polite familiarity, offering warm nods and brief exchanges. There was no entourage trailing him, no swarm of assistants or cameras, just Depp at his own pace, owning the space with quiet confidence. A confidence not born of arrogance, but of surviving the kind of public storms most people couldn't begin to comprehend. And then there were the people like Vanessa Langston, the heiress types born into vast wealth and programmed for status, who saw Johnny as a relic, someone once at the top now orbiting outside their curated bubbles of relevance. To them, he wasn't fascinating. He was a curiosity, maybe even an opportunity for a smug jab. But that was a miscalculation, because while Johnny had faced ridicule from tabloids and courtrooms, he had come through it all sharpened, not broken. By attending the gala, he wasn't just showing up, he was reclaiming space in a world that often tries to push people like him to the edges, once their usefulness has faded. He was reminding everyone that relevance isn't dictated by tech trends or glossy headlines. It's about presence, authenticity, the ability to move through a room and shift its current without needing to shout. The Langstons of the world didn't get that. They lived in a different type of illusion, one of inherited power and borrowed prestige. They hadn't been forged by fire, by years of public humiliation and rebuilding. They hadn't stood in a courtroom with the world dissecting every word of their past. They hadn't faced being written off only to rise again, not in a blaze of drama, but in the quiet dignity of just continuing. So when Johnny showed up at a gala he didn't need to be at, his presence wasn't accidental or incidental. It was a carefully chosen moment to say, without words, I'm still here, still relevant, still capable of commanding respect without demanding it. He didn't need to perform, to speak on stage or pose for endless photos. All he needed to do was walk into the room, observe, listen, and, when necessary, deliver a single line that could undo years of pretentious swagger. And when that moment came, when Vanessa Langston stepped out of line and revealed her ignorance. With one careless insult, Johnny Depp didn't need to scream. He simply reminded her, and everyone else, why you never underestimate someone who's learned how to walk through fire without burning. Meanwhile, Vanessa Langston was already making her presence known. The daughter of Richard Langston, the reclusive founder of Langston. Tech, a company rumored to be working on secretive AI defense contracts, Vanessa wasn't just any heiress. She had tried, and some would say failed, to carve out her own niche in the world of business. Known more for her red carpet appearances and Instagram influence than actual innovation, she'd become a tabloid staple. Still, with her father's fortune behind her, rooms opened, photographers clicked, and no one dared cross her. At least, not until that night. Vanessa had taken up residence at the center of the gala's social orbit. She was commanding, dressed. In a custom atelier gown that shimmered like starlight under the chandeliers, her entourage followed her with the reverence of political aides. She knew people were watching, and she was performing for the cameras. But when Johnny Depp walked into the room, the center shifted. Suddenly the flashbulbs moved in his direction, a subtle but real shift in attention. And Vanessa didn't like it. Johnny wasn't dressed to impress. He never is. He was dressed to be Johnny Depp. A tailored black suit with subtle gothic flair, tinted glasses, a vintage chain on his vest. Effortless, slightly aloof and unmistakably himself. He nodded at a few guests, smiled lightly at a couple of old friends. The moment was low-key until Vanessa opened her mouth. She was standing just a few feet away, talking to a group of startup founders, and it's unclear if she meant for him to hear it or not, but with a voice loud enough to cross. The space, she said. Funny how washed-up actors still get invited to real events. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed like a sharp tap of crystal against porcelain. People paused, eyebrows raised. Conversations dropped by half a decibel. Vanessa smiled, basking in the moment. That kind of jab, disguised as a casual remark, was her signature. She thought it clever, sharp. Maybe she believed that Depp, with all he'd endured in the press, would swallow it and move on. But that's not what happened. Johnny stopped. His polished shoes paused mid-step on the marble floor, the soft echo of music and conversation seeming to dull around him. The murmurs at the gala faded as a few nearby heads turned, sensing a shift in the room's energy. He hadn't planned to make a scene. In fact, for most of the evening, Johnny had kept to himself, nodding politely, sipping sparingly from his champagne glass, exchanging pleasantries with old friends and distant acquaintances. But there are moments in life where instinct takes over, and this was one of them. He turned slowly, deliberately, with the grace of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to say. Vanessa Langston had been smirking, her circle of friends, draped in designer gowns and pretentious confidence, tittered around her like hyenas in heels. They'd clearly meant for Johnny to hear the jab. It wasn't even subtle. "Funny how washed-up actors still get invited to real events," she'd said, her voice just loud enough to cut through the buzz of conversation, yet masked with the practiced nonchalance of someone used to getting away with cruel comments. It was the kind of insult meant to diminish, to bruise the ego, to remind someone of their supposed fall from grace. But Johnny Depp wasn't just anyone. In that single, breathless moment, he turned to face her fully, his frame upright but relaxed, exuding the kind of presence that demanded silence without ever needing to raise his voice. The light above shimmered off his champagne glass as he lifted it slightly, an elegant, almost ironic toast. His eyes, sharp and clear beneath the low brim of his hat, met hers without flinching. There was no trace of anger in his voice when he spoke, no sign of defensiveness. Only calm precision, a subtle elegance in the way the words slipped out, measured and icy. "Your empire's built on Daddy's borrowed time." For a full second, it didn't register. The words hung in the air like suspended notes of music, reverberating just beneath the surface. Vanessa blinked, the edges of her smile faltering, and then the meaning slammed into her like a freight train. Around her the snickering stopped. Even her entourage, those ever-faithful socialites who thrived on mockery, grew deathly still. You could hear the faint clink of a waiter setting down a tray in the distance, but nothing else, because those words, those 7 words, weren't just a clever comeback. They were a scalpel, slicing through pretense, straight to the bone of truth. Everyone in that room knew what Johnny was alluding to. Rumors had been circulating for months about Richard Langston's empire, Langston Tech. What had once been hailed as the bleeding edge of digital infrastructure was now a hushed scandal in waiting. Insiders whispered about inflated valuations, shell company acquisitions, and quietly sealed settlements. The federal probes weren't public yet, but in the elite circles that made up the gala's guest list, secrets didn't stay buried for long. Johnny didn't need to elaborate. He didn't throw accusations or raise his voice. He didn't need to. The brilliance of his statement was in its simplicity, its precision. Vanessa's empire, her clout, her position, her untouchable aura, wasn't truly hers. It was built on the fragile, faltering success of her father's wealth, which, if the whispers were true, was a house of cards. She tried to recover. A flicker of indignation passed across her face. She opened her mouth, perhaps to retort, perhaps to laugh it off, but the damage was done. The smug superiority that had once radiated from her seemed suddenly cheap, hollow. The crowd, those within earshot at least, weren't looking at Johnny with pity. They were looking at him with respect, with admiration, because he hadn't just stood up for himself. He had exposed the brittle foundation of cruelty that so often underpins elitism. One of the older guests, a retired studio exec, let out a soft chuckle. Someone else raised their own glass, quietly, almost in salute. Johnny gave the briefest nod, turned back around, and resumed walking toward the terrace as if nothing had happened. He didn't bask in the moment. He didn't look back to see the reaction. That wasn't his style. Vanessa stood frozen, her jaw clenched, her perfectly curated facade cracking just enough for the embarrassment to seep in. The whispering started moments later, soft, restrained, but within minutes it spread like wildfire. People love a sharp line, especially when it carries truth. And Johnny's words weren't just sharp, they were surgical. They cut through. Wealth, status, entitlement. They reminded everyone in the room that authenticity doesn't come with a price tag. By the time Johnny reached the terrace and lit a cigarette beneath the starlit sky, his name was already on the lips of nearly every guest. Not because he'd started a fight, not because he'd made a scene, but because he'd done something few people in that world dared to do. He called out the illusion. The news traveled fast. Within hours, influencers were tweeting about the moment. "Johnny Depp just said the coldest thing I've ever heard," one wrote, attaching a blurry photo of the encounter. The phrase itself, "Your empire's built on daddy's borrowed time," became a meme, a viral soundbite, a mantra. For those tired of nepotism masquerading as merit. But for Johnny, it wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about revenge or one-upping someone half his age with double the arrogance. It was about truth, about holding a mirror to someone who had weaponized cruelty as casual entertainment, and watching them squirm in the reflection. That night, Johnny didn't need a script, a camera, or a director to deliver one of the most iconic lines of his life. All he needed was 7 words, delivered at the perfect time, with perfect clarity. And a calm, unwavering look that said, "I see right through you." It was like cutting through velvet with a diamond-tipped blade. Not loud, not theatrical, but lethal. The air left the room, not literally, but that's what it felt like. Silence. Actual stunned silence. You could hear the ice settling in the glasses. Someone nearby stifled a gasp. Vanessa's smile froze, faltered. Her friends looked between her and Depp like they had front-row seats to an unexpected show, because here's the thing. That wasn't just an insult, it was a truth wrapped in timing. People in elite circles already knew there were whispers about Langston Tech, investigations, potential antitrust violations. Anonymous leaks suggesting internal chaos. Richard Langston had made his billions riding the first big wave of consumer tech, but lately, his company was under intense scrutiny. Some even whispered it was being propped up artificially through overseas investors and shell partnerships. What Johnny said, it hit the softest nerve in the hardest way, and that's the genius of the moment. He didn't curse. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't retaliate with aggression. He used insight and tone. And in a room where everyone is guarding their image, that kind of strike is devastating. Vanessa, who seconds earlier was bathing in attention, now looked cornered. Her rebuttal? None. She blinked, then looked away, lips pressed tight. Someone handed her a drink. She sipped, but the moment had already gone viral. By the next morning, a grainy video clip had surfaced, just a partial off-angle shot taken by an assistant on their phone, but it caught the soundbite. "Your empire's built on daddy's borrowed time." It was enough. Twitter took it. TikTok dramatized it, memes exploded, the clip made it onto gossip sites and even financial blogs, and almost simultaneously new documents about Langston Tech were leaked to journalists, suggesting inflated valuations and pending federal inquiries. Suddenly, what had been gossip was now financial news. Vanessa's name was trending, for all the wrong reasons. Depp, on the other hand, he didn't address it, not a tweet, not a quote. He just let the moment sit, knowing full well that silence can sometimes roar louder than explanation. Crisis consultants reportedly advised the Langstons to go into PR lockdown. Richard Langston canceled an appearance at a shareholder summit. The company issued a vague statement about baseless speculation. But investors aren't stupid, especially when the smoke comes right after a public jab like that. And while the world was busy choosing sides, dissecting the ethics of the moment, and analyzing Depp's mysterious composure, something bigger was happening. It wasn't just a viral clip. It was a reminder of how image, legacy, and entitlement can all unravel with a single, perfectly placed sentence. People praised Depp not just for the line, but for the restraint. He didn't rant. He didn't spiral. He responded, with facts wrapped in finesse. It was a masterclass in emotional intelligence, quiet strength, social intelligence in action. Coaches and psychologists even began referencing the moment in articles. One even wrote a piece titled "Depp and the 7-Word Scalpel: How Verbal Precision Destroys Ego." In that piece, celebrity crisis coach Miranda Kellor commented, One composed response can salvage your dignity and ruin a bully's narrative in seconds. It's all about timing and tone, and that's exactly what this was. A case study in grace under fire. A clapback that didn't just sting, it echoed. So what do we take away from all of this? That confidence isn't loud. That truth, delivered with calm, can pierce deeper than rage ever could. And that legacy isn't built on what people say about you, but how you respond when you're tested. Johnny Depp, a man who's been vilified and vindicated 1,000 times over, proved once again that he doesn't just survive chaos, he reshapes it. He walked into a lion's den, left one sentence behind, and walked out without ever needing to explain himself. It's easy to forget, in the age of clickbait and cancel culture, that some battles aren't fought with shouting matches or tweets. Some are won with elegance, and sometimes your silence after the storm is the loudest message of all. So here's the question. What would you have done? If someone tried to diminish your worth in front of a crowd, would you have fired back? Stayed silent? Or would you have crafted something so sharp and so true that even the powerful had to pause? Drop your story in the comments below. I'd love to know. Because these moments, they're not just for celebrities, they happen in boardrooms, classrooms, dinner, tables, and comment sections. And how you respond might just change everything. And if this story gave you chills, or at least made you think differently about grace under pressure, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good comeback, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories from the world where fame, power, and pride collide. Until next time, remember, sometimes it only takes 7 words to break a billion-dollar illusion. And Johnny? He chose the perfect 7.